Today we're going to build this 1998 YZ125 engine. These should be about the same from 1994 to 2001. There's probably some slight differences, but again, this is a 1998. So if you guys have been following along, this is the engine for the Grape Ape. We're about to do a full motor build on this thing. Before I get started, I always like to give a disclaimer. My name is Mike Sabo. I would consider myself a junior engine builder. I did not go to professional schools or anything like that. This is all what I've learned from books and experience, but I have over the years become pretty damn good at it, but just something to take in mind if you are going to be using this as instruction for your personal build. So we're about to jump right into this. Our cases are ready to go. Our parts are all laid out. Everything is ready to rock and roll. Hopefully everything will go nice and smoothly. This was a basket case, so I did not pull this engine apart. It's possible that there's parts missing and stuff. I'm hoping that this goes smooth and without a hitch. We've also got our service manual right here, so we're about to hop right into it. Before I do that, if you guys haven't already, consider hitting that thumbs up button if these videos are enjoyable or if they help you out at all. And also consider hitting that subscribe button and hitting that notification bell. It helps me out a ton. All right, let's get into it. Now, as we're going through the video, I will have the section from the Climber service manual that I'm using in the top right-hand corner for reference. Something else to note before I begin the build is that there are a number of aftermarket parts going onto this engine, including an Athena 144cc big bore kit. I also port matched the cases, fixed any problem areas with the cases, surfaced all of the mating areas, as well as very mildly porting the Athena cylinder. If you're interested in seeing details on that, I will link to the video doing these mods in the description below. With that being said, let's begin. All right, guys, the case halves are all apart, ready to rock and roll. I've got brand new crank bearings in here. All the other bearings are good to go. I made sure that everything was in spec. Got a new crank seal in there, new countershaft seal, new shift shaft seal. Everything is ready to go. Going to be using Maxima assembly lube for this. If you guys are hardcore Yamaha guys, you like to use only OEM products, Yamaha does make an assembly lube. It's a molybdenum disulfide grease. I'm not going to be using that one today, but both of these things will be linked in the description below, as well as some of the special tools and other tools that I use in this video. So first things first, just going to make sure we've got a good amount of assembly lube in our bearings. So first thing we'll put in is our crank. This is a Hot Rods crank. If you guys saw my previous videos, I've already checked to make sure this thing is in spec. It is good to go. So we're going to drop this thing in place. So this is the left case half side. The stator is on the opposite side of this, so we'll put the tapered end facing inward. We're just going to drop it in place, and we're probably going to have to pull it in with a crankshaft puller. Oh, actually, that might have went all the way in. No. Now, when you're putting these in, you also want to make sure that your connecting rod is facing upward, otherwise it can get stuck in the cases. In this case, it probably really couldn't happen, but in sometimes in four-stroke applications, you could get it stuck, as I've done in the past. Now, to pull the crank through, we're going to use a Tusk crankcase installation tool. You don't want to go on the other side and tap it in with a hammer. You'll throw your crankshaft all out of whack, and the engine might run initially, but you're gonna trash your bottom end. You're probably gonna blow the engine like immediately. So you have to have a tool like this. Definitely a must-have. Pretty easy to use. You have the one segment right here. You can change this portion out depending on what kind of crank you have. It's a pretty universal tool, and what we're going to do is just thread right onto the crank. Bring that on as far as it can go. And then we have the barrel that goes on here. Got to make sure it's lined up. There's a little pin in here. There we go. And then we've got two bars. These go under each side. You want to make sure they're on sturdy portions of the case if you can. Got a nut that goes on the end. And as we tighten that, that's going to pull the crank, and it's going to be pressing against these two bars, and it'll pull the crank right into that bearing. All right, now I tried to get you guys in a position where you can actually see the crank being pulled in. Make sure connecting rod is facing upward. Actually, it's okay if it makes that sound. I'm going to pull this in until it bottoms out. All right, and then we'll back this off. Move these bars. And we're good to go. All right, crank is in place. What the f, dude? All right, crank is in place. Good trick to put these in is putting your crank in the freezer and heating up your inner bearing race. Sometimes you can drop the crank right in place, but it's nice having that crank installation tool because if you forget to do that, you can still go ahead and do the job. And sometimes you still need it even if you freeze the crank. All right, now we're gonna put our transmission in. The way that the manual wants you to do it is by meshing the two together and popping them in place. This one with the short end is gonna go right in here. And then we have our counter shaft is going to go through the back here. And you want to hang on, you have a washer on the back here. I believe this is 6th gear. It might be 2nd gear, I'm not sure. But this gear can slide off. So you just want to hang on to that. You want to make sure they're bottomed in there. So it's okay to take a mallet. Just tap them into place. All right, now we'll put our shift forks in. We're going to start with the one that says L, that is for your left. It's going to go down here into 6th gear. On all of these, I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube on them. You want to make sure that these pins are going to face where the drum goes. So the drum's going to be back here. Just make sure you get it into the correct groove. We've got our center fork. It's going to go right in here, and then the right side fork goes right here. Now we're going to put our shift drum in place. As with everything else, I'm just going to put a little bit of assembly lube in all of our grooves. Make sure we push these to the side so that this can fit in. Now there's two shift forks. We're going to put the longer one in first. You can see there is a tapered down, a narrowed portion up top. It's going to go in facing this way. Of course, you want to put some lubrication on this. Just make sure that bottoms out in the case. Then make sure your center fork is in the correct groove on your shift drum. Now we're going to put our small shaft in. This one can go in any orientation. And we're good to go. All right, we're about to assemble the case halves, but before we do that, we've got 3 dowels that we're going to put in. We've got one large dowel that's going to go up here, and that is accompanied by an O-ring. You want to use a brand new one if you can. I'm going to put just a little bit of lubricant on this. Put that in place right there. And as with all dowels, I like to put just a little bit of anti-seize on them so that when it comes time to tear this motor down for the next guy, everything will come apart, hopefully relatively easy. It'll pop right in place like that. And we've got 2 dowels like this, same thing. Put a little bit of anti-seize on them. We got one that goes in the back, and we got one that goes in the front. Now we're going to coat the case halves with gasket sealer. I want to do both sides. Any gasket sealer that is gas resistant is going to work. I'm going to use Yamaha 6B. The manual recommends Yamaha 4, but this is gas resistant also, and I've had really good success with it. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a thin coat on both sides. All right, case halves are coated. Going to put some assembly lube on our bearings on this half, and we should be able to just drop this in place. And if it doesn't, we can pull this half on as well. You can tap it a little bit, but you don't want to force it. Yeah, I think we'll have to pull this one on. All right, we're gonna use the same tool, but this time we're just gonna use a different attachment for this side of the crank. Thread this in, and we'll thread this on. Just like before, we'll place our bars across here. Slide our barrel in place. And we'll tighten our nut down. This is definitely a step that you do not want to rush. Make sure everything's lined up, all your dowels, everything's coming down nice and even. This seems to be going down nice and smooth. All right. I think we're home. Easy. All right, so now we're going to put in our crankcase bolts. I flipped it over to the stator side. I'm using a stainless steel bolt kit from alliedbolts.com. I feel like this is a no-brainer. It costs like 30 bucks and it dresses up the motor really nice. Everything looks really fresh. And it's just going to make sure that you don't have any stripped out heads, because Yamaha fasteners can kind of be junky. So everything is really nice and organized. You can see it says crankcase right on there. The kit comes with all of the bolts separated. Just makes it really nice when you're putting a motor together. So all of these will be included in the description below if you're interested in getting a kit for your bike as well. Going to be using just a little bit of anti-seize on these. It's an important thing to do when you're using stainless steel hardware. And basically, I just drop these in place and make sure that the bolts are sticking out an equal amount, and that's kind of like the easiest way to figure out where everything goes. It's not that hard. I'm going to run these in place with a Milwaukee impact driver. This is a small driver. It is the M12. I love this thing because it's got adjustable torque settings back here. You're not going to strip anything out. If you put it on 1, it's like 5 foot-pounds. It's almost nothing. I'm going to put it on 2 just because it's a little bit faster and I have a good feel for this thing. I'm just going to run them down with this thing, and then I'll be using the T-handle to just snug them up by hand. If you want to torque these, I would go to about 8 foot-pounds. I wouldn't go any heavier than that. These strip out really easy. I just have a good feel for this because I've been doing it for a while, and the T-handles are great. I'll have both these tools linked in the description below. And when you're coming down with these, just come into a little snug, and you'll see, you might be able to see the gasket sealer squeezing out. And we're going to go in a crisscross pattern. Personally, I don't think you have to go in any particular pattern. In the service manuals, sometimes it'll have like a numbered pattern. They want you to go exactly how they have it. I don't really think that's necessary. I think if you go in a random pattern and you're just not going around in a circle, you're good to go. And typically, you want to go, if there's any bolts in the center, you want to do those ones earlier on than the ones in the outside. Take our T-handle, snug these up. Now you don't have to do this, but I like to take a little bit of lacquer thinner and paper towels and just wipe away any of the excess gasket material that squeezed out during assembly. Just makes it look nice and clean. Once you have that bolted down, it's a good idea to make sure that all of your rotating assemblies move freely. If your crank is tight, that sometimes that can be fixed just by tapping on either end of your crank, just gently with a mallet. That can sometimes seat it in the bearing, or sometimes you have to put the puller on either side and pull it just a little bit. This one was actually a little bit tight when I first put it back together, so we're good to go there. Transmission spins nice and freely. Now we're ready to put on the stator and the cover. All right, so we're gonna take our stator plate and slide it in place, put our grommet in here, make sure that's seated correctly. And you can see right here, this hash mark. Now we do have some adjustability with this stator plate. So if you want to put it in its factory location, you want to line it up like so. However, I'm going to advance the timing just slightly. Throw some new stainless steel fasteners in here. Same thing as before. You want to put a little bit of anti-seize on these. So now is when you want to adjust the timing to where you want it. I'm going to move it to about 4 degrees advanced by rotating it to the right as this engine rotates in a counterclockwise fashion. So moving the plate this way will make the pickup reach sooner than later. All right, now we're going to put a new Woodruff key into our crank. Put a little bit of anti-seize on this one. Stuff is so small in here, you got to use needle nose. Place our flywheel. Oh my God, check that out. There was a washer and a nut in here and another Woodruff key. No wonder it wasn't going in. That's better. This is a flywheel that I had to purchase off of eBay because this was a basket case engine and it actually didn't come with a flywheel. So now we've got a washer that goes on and a nut. I like to put a good amount of red Loctite on these. A lot of people are like, oh, you'll never be able to get it off. But they always come off. And if they don't, you just use a little bit of heat, it'll come right off. But this way, you don't have to worry about it falling off. Well, this gets torqued down to 28 foot-pounds. You can use an impact on there if you hold this with your hand, and that usually works just fine. However, I do have this clutch tool. It's made by Tusk. It's also a flywheel installation tool. Dual purpose. You got these 2 pins here, and they go right in here in the flywheel. And I've been itching to use this thing, so might as well break it in. on the Grape Ape. Man, I'll tell you what, having the right tools makes stuff really easy. All right, now we're gonna put a new gasket on. The gaskets I'm using are Windorosa or Vertex gaskets. These are good quality gaskets. I'm gonna coat them in grease. The purpose for that is when the next person takes this thing apart, or I do, if I want to adjust the timing or something, if these gaskets are greased, you're not gonna have any problems when you pull it apart with gaskets sticking to the surface and having to cut them off. And a lot of times you can even reuse the gaskets, which you should always do new gaskets, but in some cases, if you have to, when they're greased, they're really easy to work with. I'm just using regular old bearing grease. It also helps to keep the gaskets in place. It's got a little bit of a tack to it. We'll put our brand new taupe bar Stator cover on. Man, does that look nice or does that look nice? While we're on this side, we'll go ahead and put together our sprocket assembly. So we have a small sleeve here that's going to go on our counter shaft. Put a little bit of assembly lube on here. This can go in either way. I usually try to flip it around if it's used because it'll get grooves worn into it. And if you switch it around, you get a little bit more life out of it. And we have our 13-tooth sprocket. I like to face it outward with the numbers. The other side's just flat. I just like to leave it that way, so if you ever forget what your sprocket count is, you can just look at it and see. Put that in place. Then we have a lock washer. Ideally, you should replace this with a new one. This one isn't in terrible shape. I flattened it out and then rebent it. It'll work just fine. And then we have our sprocket nut. I will be putting some Loctite on this and then tightening it down, but I like to do that later on when it's in the machine and the chain's on it so that you don't have to hold this while it's spinning. You could just blast it on with an impact gun, but for now, I'm just gonna put it in place by hand. I also have this trick little case saver. It's by Moose. And I thought it was black, but it's actually like a steel blue color. I think it'll look pretty trick on there. It's not the most advanced case saver, but I think it's gonna work just fine. Looks pretty good. Flip this thing around to the other side. And it's nice working with a 125 because it's so light. All right, so we're gonna move on to the shift assembly. So first thing we're gonna put on is our shift detent. This is the arm. We've got our spring. You see the little groove in the arm where the spring goes. And then we've got a washer and bolt combination and a little top hat that's gonna go underneath. And that top hat goes through the detent. It acts as a spacer so that this thing can move freely. So put our spring in place. This goes right here. Just gonna snug this by hand. Next, we're gonna put the shift cam in place. So we've got the shift cam here, the bolt that holds it in place. It's gonna go like so. We're gonna put some blue Loctite on this. And we're gonna have to move the detent out of the way in order to get this in there. So we're gonna do that with a screwdriver. See if we can find a place to hold this against without damaging anything. All right, and then there's a little pin right here that you need to align with the shift cam. There we go. Thread this in. You can take the pressure off of this. I'm gonna give that a buzz with the impact. So now we're gonna put our shift ball assembly together. This seems complicated, but it's really not. You have these two springs that go on either side. And there's these little caps that go on the spring. Then you have your pawls. These go in like so. You can see the rounded side fits in up at the top. The other side's square. It won't fit if you put it that way. So it goes like so. Pinch those down. Now we'll take this assembly, put our plate on. This should hold the pawls in place while you get this into the shift cam. So this will go on like so. Squeeze in your shift pawls, and it should go into place. Sometimes it's a little tricky. There we go. Then we have two bolts that go down here, and they're both going to get blue Loctite. If you're going to torque these, I'll go to 8 foot-pounds. I'm just going to snug them by hand. We'll take our assembly lube. Just make sure you have lube on all these components so it's not dry when you first start it up. And we're going to put in our shift shaft. This is a brand new one. The one that came with this machine was actually snapped off, not even bent. So I'm going to put some lubrication on this, and this just slides in place. It'll pop out the other side, and you want to make sure this little top hat pops through that. Well guys, I was going to move on to the Kickstarter, but I just found this lovely gem. The kickstart shaft is snapped off. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to order some parts before we can continue. Alright guys, well fast forward quite a bit of time and we have our brand new kick shaft. So you can see this portion up here is what was snapped off on the old one. This is a Cultric, it's an aftermarket piece. This must be a piece that is commonly broken because when there's aftermarket companies that make a piece, that's usually what that means. Anyways, what I'm going to do is assemble the kick assembly with you guys because it can be a little bit confusing. So we have a gear here with this clip. This can come off, this little stay piece. Probably will be on there though. It's going to face towards the stopper right here. And we're just going to spin this on. You can see the rotational gears there. And it's going to go to the right side of the stopper if you're holding it like this. Next we have this washer that goes, oh geez. Next we've got this washer that goes in place like so. That's a brand new washer. Look at this old one. I don't know what happened to this thing, but we replaced it. So then we've got this big spring like so. You want it facing with this arm towards the gear. And then you have this piece in here, this little post. That's gonna go in your shaft right here. So we'll just put this in place. Tuck that in there like so. And then we have a plastic bushing with a little cutaway. The cutaway is gonna face towards that same little piece of the spring. And then that actually clips in place like so. And that's gonna hold the spring from falling out of place. And there is your kicker assembly. Put some assembly lube on this before we put it in, just a little bit. And then we're gonna put this in place. You have the little stopper here is gonna go in here. And then this actual kick stopper goes up against this ledge right here. And then we'll just wind our spring in. But first we'll just kind of get this in place. Might have to slide this a little bit. It can spin. What's going on here? Well, you can see we got a little bit of an imperfection here on this aftermarket piece. So I'm just going to shave that down slightly and I'll be right back. All right, that should be good now. Shave that down a little bit. See if she fits in there. Once again, this little post goes in here. There we go. And then we'll take our spring, wrap it around, and it goes right in there. And now while that's in there, you can throw your kicker in place and just see, yep. Just want to make sure that's operating correctly. All right, now we're going to put the idler gear in place. Before we do that, there is a clip that goes in the back and the front of the gear. So we'll put the one in the back first. These are brand new clips. If you can, you have access to new clips, definitely want to go new on these if you can, because they get worn out and then the last thing you want them doing is slipping off and then your gear ends up, you know, shredding in your cases. Just make sure there's a little groove. There it goes. Snaps right into place. Just want to make sure that's snapped into the groove. We'll put a little bit of assembly lube on here. And we'll take the gear, put it in place. It goes this way with the depression in the front. You can see what the back looks like. It's going to go on there. Then there's a washer that goes in front. And then another clip. There we go. And then when you spin the kicker, that will engage this gear. I'll show you. See, as you kick the gear, it comes out. It's pretty cool. Now we'll move on to our primary drive gear. I believe this can go either way. We've got a collar that's going to go in our crank seal here. It's a really snug fit, so you're going to want to put some assembly lube on it. And be careful not to roll the inner lip of your crank seal. Just take your time with it. Make sure you don't have any sharp edges or burrs on your collar, because that can catch the seal as well. Just work it in there. Oh, you can see it actually kick the spring off. Now what I ended up doing is putting this in the lathe and just hitting this with a file just to smooth the edges a little bit, and maybe that'll make this pop in the seal a little bit easier, I don't know. Now we'll put our primary drive gear in place. I'm going to put just a drop of Loctite 272 on here. This is a high temperature Loctite, just a tiny bit. I'm going to thread this in place. We're going to come back to that to tighten it to 40 foot-pounds once we get our clutch basket in. All right, now we're going to go ahead and put our clutch assembly together. We've got these 2 thick washers. One is going to go on first. Put some assembly lube on here. Got a spacer. That goes on there. A little more assembly lube. Got a bearing. Then our clutch basket. Fit that into our gears. There we go. And then we've got that other washer, goes in front. Both of those washers are the same, so you can't mix them up. And we've got our inner hub. We've got a locking washer. These can be reused one time. You can see this is the side that was used last time. I mean, ideally you replace it, but you really only need one side folded over to lock it. So this is still going to be good for another use. There are little tabs. They face inward. You can see where they fit in that clutch inner hub. Place that there. Put just a drop of red Loctite on our threads, and we're going to spin our nut on. We're going to use our Tusk clutch holding tool. These things are awesome because they're pretty much universal. You can use these on almost any quad or bike. It doesn't need to be very tight. It's just going to hold it in place like so. Now we're going to torque this down. The service manual calls for 59 foot-pounds. I'm just going to go to an even 60. There we go. Bend this tab over. I hate these things. Realistically, a lot of guys don't even use them. We put Loctite on there, they usually don't come off, but it's just a safety measure. All right, and while we're at it, we'll go ahead and tighten our primary drive gear. I'm going to use the penny method, which you can take a penny and stuff it in the gears, and that'll keep the assembly from turning. I'm going to use this little aluminum nail. You just want to make sure if you do use the nail that it is not a material that's stronger than the gear, because that can ruin the gear. The aluminum will give before that gear does. And this is going to go to 40 foot-pounds. There we go. Then of course, remember to get that nail out of there. All right, and now we will do the incredibly fun task of putting in our clutch pack. Yay. Got our clutch fibers in here. This is a brand new Rocky Mountain Tusk competition clutch pack. It's an 8-disc and fiber setup. I've got it soaking in some AMS oil, 1050 dirt bike oil. You can use whatever oil you choose. Just got them soaking in this bag. It is good to soak your clutch plates, and we will go fiber first. Just drop it right in there. I've got the engine propped up like this because a lot of times when you do this, oil will start to run out and go down on the bench, but this way it'll run into the cases. And then next we'll do a fiber. As normal, we've got a sharp edge and a rounded edge, and most people just throw them in there. Some people like to do it with sharp edge out, round edge out. It really doesn't matter how you put them in there. I like to do it, we'll do the sharp edge out this time. Some people get really weird with how long they let their clutch soak in oil. And the big thing is, you have to remember, you know, when you're assembling a motor, if you put the oil on the clutch pack right away, you're not going to be riding it right away. You still got to assemble the motor and stuff, so it's going to be sitting and soaking that oil up. Now, if you were just changing your clutch pack out, like at the track or something, you know, and you actually might be riding it like instantly, then yeah, you might want to let them soak for a little bit. But regardless, you just want to make sure that your fibers have absorbed the oil that you choose, and you're going to get better life and better performance out of it that way. All right, so we're going to put our pressure plate on. We've got our actuator right here. We've got one washer, pancake bearing, put a little lube on that, another washer, and this will go in place like so, and drop this on. Gonna make sure that's sitting nice and flush. We've got our brand new heavy duty Tusk clutch springs, because this thing's gonna be putting down mad power. Now I'm gonna run these in place gently with the impact, but not tighten them down with it. You gotta be careful, those fingers in there, they can snap really easy. You don't need Loctite on these. The spring tension will hold them. And we'll go in a crisscross pattern as well. Now I've got a pretty good feel for this, so I'm just going to snug them down by hand. If you're going to torque them, go to about 8 foot-pounds. All right, now we're about to put our clutch cover on. If you haven't, this is a good time to surface the case halves on both sides, just so that you don't have any leaks or anything. What we're going to do is we have to put our exhaust governor in. We have our exhaust actuation arm, which is right here. And we're going to put a little bit of lubricant on here. There's a seal that goes right here. So if you're planning on replacing the seal, now's the time to do that as well. Put a little bit of lube on here before we put it in. And this just pushes into place. Now I've got this little exhaust governor holder with 2 little Allen bolts that bolts into this. Gonna lube up our bearing in here. And then here's our exhaust governor. This can be disassembled. I'm not going to be disassembling it. It faces with this portion downward. And there's a little groove right here. That's actually where this actuator is going to go. It fits right into that groove. And that's in place. And then we have our water pump gear. That's going to go right through here. Have a bearing here, and there's actually 2 seals in here. One on the inside and then one on the other side. Definitely want to replace those if you're cracking into your engine like this. As always, put a little bit of lube on here. And just ease that through. And we'll worry about putting the impeller on the other side once we actually get this on. All right, now we're going to go ahead and put our cover on. We've got 2 dowel pins. Put a little bit of anti-seize on these. All right, now we're going to put a new gasket on here. I went ahead and put some bearing grease on here. All right, let's get this on. You're going to have to hold down your exhaust valve lever so that your exhaust governor doesn't pop out. Let's see how easily we can get this thing on here. Now sometimes you have to spin the water impeller to get that gear to line up. Makes it a little bit easier if you put the impeller on there. Oh, you can see it. Looks like it went right there. Now we're going to put our clutch cover on. We've got 2 little dowel pins on either side. Going to put a dab of anti-seize on them. These just pop into place. Grease up our clutch cover gasket. Hang that on our dowels. Now before we put our cover on, you want to make sure that your actuator with the ribs is facing to the back of the engine. If you look at your cover, you'll see the teeth on here that grab that. So you want to make sure that that's facing the right side. And when we put the cover on, we're going to spin this and kind of pull the cover in. You'll see how it works. Again, this is another part you might want to surface now that you have the opportunity to do so. There's also a seal that goes up here, so that's a good thing to replace at this time also. There we go. Pulls it right on there. Got a little drain bolt here with a copper washer. And then up here you've got a little special bolt that holds the actuator arm from coming up and down. So it's a special bolt that's got an end like this. I customized this one because I wanted to match the rest of the stainless steel bolts, but the OEM one looks similar to that. Put a little washer on there. And there you see. Now it can't come out. All right, now we're gonna get the water pump. Gonna pop this impeller off real quick. Put just a little bit of blue Loctite on there. We've got a washer that goes in place, and then we're gonna spin our impeller back on. I'm just gonna buzz this on with the impact gun. To keep it from spinning, I'm gonna hold the rod. That should be good. You've got 2 dowel pins in here at the bottom and at the top. And again, greased up my gasket. Hang it on our dowels. Take our water pump cover. And then we've got our drain bolt with a crush washer on there. All right, now we're gonna move into the top end. We're gonna go ahead and put our piston in place. This is our Athena 144 big bore piston. If you have a regular bore, it's gonna be very similar. This is a 1-ring design. I've already gone ahead and checked my ring gap. If you need to do that, you can refer to my ring gap video. Very easy to do. Our ring gap is in spec. When you put on your ring, you want to make sure that the print, let's see if I can focus on that for you guys. You want that print to be facing upwards. And what I like to do is you take the little piston ring stopper in there, hook one end of the ring like so, and then you just kind of walk the ring around, doing your best not to scratch the piston. If you do get a little bit of scratching on there, it's okay. And just clip that in place. There we go. Now before we go putting our piston on, going to stuff our crank. That way our tiny little wrist pin clips don't fall into the crank, because that can be a major pain in the butt. Now, I mean, this is pretty obvious, but you want to make sure that your piston is facing forward. Almost always pistons are going to have an arrow on them. They will indicate which way they go. If they don't, there's usually ports on the intake side. However, in cases like this piston, it almost looks exactly the same in the front and the back. So there usually will be an arrow, like I said, but if there isn't, you want to refer to the service manual. I've also already gone ahead and put one of the piston clips, I don't know if you guys can see it, in the one side. It's easier to do it that way because those things can be kind of cumbersome. You get the one in there first, and then you can, go ahead and put your wrist pin in and put the second one in. It makes it a little bit easier. Put our new wrist pin in. Get some, this is just some 2-stroke bean oil. Gonna lube up our wrist pin, and we'll put our piston in place. Now I'll put the other piston clip in. Apologize if you guys can't see this, it's pretty tight in here. You want to make sure the opening is either at the top or the bottom. That's going to be for the force that this thing makes. It can actually compress these springs, and they can actually fall out. And especially in something like an 85 or a 125 like this, it's actually, these things can build enough RPMs where that could actually happen. So just be on the safe side and make sure that the opening is at the top or the bottom. There we go. Make sure that thing is completely seated. The last thing you want is for that ring to come out. You'll mess your cylinder up. All right, now we're getting ready to put the cylinder on, but I think it would be a lot easier to put the power valve on while the cylinder's off. I think it'll be easier to show you guys as well. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. In case you haven't been following the series, this is an Athena 144 cylinder, so it's a big bore. It is slightly different than stock. This is going to be similar. I think it's 96 to 01 is very similar. Now this is a 98, however, you'll notice if you have a 98, your exhaust port's going to be a little bit different. I actually got caught up with that when I ordered the aftermarket exhaust for this. It didn't fit because the 98 had an internal bore where the exhaust actually went into the cylinder, and as you can see, this one, the exhaust slides over, which is actually the newer design. So that's how the Athena big bore cylinders come, even if you have a 98. Something to definitely take note of. The power valve is different too. So the Athena is going to come with its own power valve setup. However, it's going to be really similar. So if you have a stock setup, you should be okay following these instructions. Here is an OEM, one of the power valves. You can see there's two of them. And I'll show you. And Athena, you can see the Athena is a bit bigger. If I go like this, tell a little bit better. So yeah, the Athena is a little bit bigger, so you're going to need special power valves for these. The other thing is, you'll notice this plate on the back is different. So on the OEM one, when you place these in, I believe they go this way, with a flat portion facing down like that, like so. And how you know that it's in the right side is because this pin here will be perpendicular, or parallel rather, with the powerhouse frame. So if you put that in the wrong side, just to give you an example, you see that's not perpendicular any longer. So you can't really mess it up. I mean, I guess you might be able to jam it in there the wrong way, but that's the way that it goes. But yeah, so in the OEM orientation, when you go in like here like this, I believe there's just one hole on the bottom, and then the hole will just hold up against this collar and stop that from coming out. Now on the Athena kit, you can see there's actual bolt holes. It goes on this side. Put this in place here and I'll show you. And you can see it's parallel, that's what you want. So you can see there's going to be a bolt in the top and the bottom. So that one is in place. Then we'll take the other one, same thing. pop it in place. And also, I went in and smoothed where these power valves slide in and out because it was really rough from the factory, from Athena. You want that to be a nice smooth action. So if you have anything that's holding it up, especially if it's a new cylinder and you're not getting a smooth action, now's the time to go in there with a burr or a little sanding wheel and just clean it up because you want that to be nice and smooth. Otherwise your power valve won't actuate properly. Now Athena is going to come with these little, I believe these are black oxide bolts that go into these 4 holes. I'm going to use just a very small dot of high heat red Loctite, Loctite 272. And the reason I'm doing this is because power valves are notorious for coming loose. Just a very small amount. And these I'm just going to snug down. They don't need to be super tight. All right, now we have an actuation rod that's going to go in here. There's a small seal right here. If you have a new seal, you definitely want to replace it now. That's going to come through here, and there's a series of pieces that we're going to slide on as we do this. I'll show you the order right now. I'm going to put a little bit of lube on here before we slide this through the seal. It just pushes into place like so. Now we've got a little collar that's going to slide there. Now we have this little piece that's going to slide on. It's got 2 springs, and these pins on the power valves are going to fit in between each one of these springs, and then there's a little bolt that's going to adhere it to this actuation rod. So we're just going to fit this in here. I'm going to see if I can get these springs. No, they fit right on there. It's pretty easy. You get that in place, and then we'll slide the rod in. Just got to get everything lined up. There we go. And we've got another collar, goes on the other side. This just keeps everything in line. There we go. Now we're just going to spin this until we get our bolt hole lined up. See it right there. Now we're going to put our bolt in right here. You may notice I flipped around this one spring. This Athena system, not my favorite. The tolerances aren't that great. When the spring was flipped the other way, because these springs actually came from Athena, they're not the OEM ones. I would use the OEM ones, but they're a little bit shorter. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that, and they don't quite grab those posts. So I'm forced to use these, but it was pulling the power valves out unevenly. So if you flip that around, it pulls them much more evenly now. I have a microscopic amount of high heat Loctite on this bolt here, and we're just going to snug this down. Okay, I'm going to put just a little bit of 2-stroke oil back here before we close this up. Alright, now we're going to come around to the side, and we've got a little plate that's going to go on here that's going to hold the actuator arm from popping out of place. Just snug that down. Alright, I'm going to leave it with this cover off, and we'll go ahead and put the cylinder on. I want to make mention, if you do have the Athena big bore kit, you get a couple base gaskets. You've got one, I believe this is a metal coated gasket, and it's also got a rubber coating on the bottom, and then you also get a paper gasket. Now from what I understand, because there are no instructions with this kit, at least nothing came with mine, this is basically to set up your squish. So I believe with just the black base gasket, that is intended for race gas, so you're gonna have a little bit higher compression, and then if you stack the gaskets, that's gonna reduce your compression, give you a little bit more squish room at the top, and you should be able to run pump gas. Don't quote me on that, do your own research. Unfortunately, like I said, there was nothing that came with this kit giving me instructions on that. This is just what I have discovered from research and just from building engines in general. Now I'm going to be running race fuel, so I'm just going to put the black base gasket down, and I'm going to check my squish. So it's going to be up to you to check your squish and make sure that's all right. This is just an assembly video to show you how to put everything together. All right, let's get this thing on. Take a little bit of 2-stroke oil here and coat the piston. And make sure that your ring is lined up on the stopping pin. We're also going to put some 2-stroke oil in the cylinder. Just coat it on all your surfaces. We're going to squeeze that ring and just slide our cylinder on. Take your time. And you also want to make sure there's 2 dowels that you're going to want to make sure are on before you pop this in place. And I did anti-seize those, of course. So it's got 4 base bolts. Got one that's going to go in the power valve. Well, not in the power valve, but it's going to get covered. Then we've got 2 over here. Now on the bench, I'm just going to snug these down. I like to do all of my torque on the cylinder and on the head when the engine is in the frame. So that way I've got a little bit of something to work with and the motor's not spinning around on the bench. And like I said before, we're not going to be adjusting the squish in this video. This is just to show you the assembly of the engine. Put the kicker on and give her a roll. Make sure everything's nice and smooth. Ooh, yeah. That feels real good. I don't know why that's so satisfying. All right, now we're gonna come around the side and hook up our power valve actuation arm. This has a little bit of spring in it. You can lift it. You can see there's kind of like a slotted window here, and it'll fit right on the end of your actuator, just like so. And now we've got a little bolt and a washer. And I will be putting just a dot of red Loctite on this. However, this may be coming back off since we might be pulling the cylinder off to adjust our squish. So I'm just going to kind of snug that in place for purposes of this video. Now we're going to go ahead and put our cover on for the power valve arm. There is a gasket that goes on there, and then there's a rubber grommet. This is going to fit on the bottom here. It does not call for Yamaha Bond or RTV in the service manual, at least not that I could see. And I don't think oil flows up here, so I guess you could put some RTV on there for extra measure if you wanted to. Put our gasket. This might be a little bit tough to get this all to line up and not have the gasket fall out. And then we'll put our new stainless hardware in here. Again, all of the stainless hardware on this engine is getting just a little bit of anti-seize. Just walk these around, make sure that the holes line up with the gasket, because that gasket is kind of tough to get lined up. I'll be greasing that too, but this cover is going to be coming off because we have that base bolt in there. So again, I'm going to have to tighten all that stuff down, but I want to just get everything together for this video. So for now, I'll just snug this in place. Now we've got our power valve cover. Of course, if it isn't obvious, this portion goes up. You can't even put it on incorrectly though, because if you try to put it on this way, it won't fit. Got our new gasket here. I did grease this up, and we will go ahead, put our hardware on, and hopefully this won't be coming back off, so we can go ahead and snug it down. So now we'll put the head on. We're going to first put these little pins in place, little dowel pins. Again, this is the Athena big bore kit. I believe the traditional Athena kit is the same as well. Instead of using O-rings like the OEM setup, you're gonna have these little dowel pins that go in place. I did put a little bit of anti-seize on them. You just wanna be really careful you don't drop it in your water jacket. You're gonna get the dowel pins, and then you're gonna get the crush head gasket. I don't know why they did this instead of the O-rings like the OEM setup, but that's what they did. At least they made it pretty easy to not mess it up. You can see right there it says up, and then you have the 2 little holes for those dowels. So you can only put it one way. I mean, you could put it the wrong way, but then the up will be facing down. So it's pretty easy to get this right. And we'll take our head. This is the Athena head. If you're using, you can see it says Athena right on there. If you're using an Athena big bore cylinder, you need to use their head as well. Go ahead and put some new crush washers on here. We'll put our cap nuts in place. And I'm just gonna buzz these in place for now. Like I said before, we're gonna come back later once this is anchored to the frame, and we'll torque those down and check our squish. All right, and finally, the last thing we're gonna put in are the reeds. This is RTV together, but the boot is separate from the reeds. And then there's a rubber seal along the inside here. I believe this just goes right up against your case. You wanna make sure you have nice, smooth case surfaces. I think there's no gasket that goes on this, at least not OEM. You could put some RTV on there if you wanted to be extra careful against air leaks. For now, since I'm gonna be swapping this out with the V-Force 4s, I'm just gonna throw this in place. All right, guys, well, I am super stoked with the way that this came out. I am more than happy with the colors on this thing. Wait until you guys see this thing with the color scheme of the bike. If you haven't been following the build, this is for a bike called the Grape Ape. Green, blue, and purple are the primary color schemes, and black, of course. It's just all going to come together really nice. Man, I can't wait. I think it just looks awesome. Of course, we won't be running it with this pod filter. I just kind of put that on there to showcase the engine. And of course, guys, you're going to want to remember to tighten down the base bolts on your cylinder as well as the cylinder head bolts. You want to torque them down to spec. I'm going to go to 22 foot-pounds of torque on these. The base bolts will probably be around 28 foot-pounds of torque. And of course, you want to check your squish. It's extremely important to check your squish. No matter what build you're doing, especially when it comes to two-stroke, like you got to check that every time that, if you get a new cylinder, new piston, new head, any new components, just check your squish. It's really easy to do. I do have a video showing how to do it. I'm going to put that up in the corner here. Just make sure you do that so you make sure that, you're not going to have any pinging, detonation, or anything like that and just destroy your entire engine that you just got done building. So I appreciate everybody that watched. If this video helped you out, please consider hitting that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button. Let me know in the comment section below. If you're looking to support the channel even further, there is the option to join. And until the next one, guys, peace out.